In a quiet village where the rhythm of life was measured by the sound of pounding yam, the laughter of children, and the evening drumbeat that called people to gather under the great Iroko tree, there lived a man named Obinna. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and for many years he was the pride of his family. People often said, "Ah, Obinna is blessed. His barn is never empty, his farm is always fruitful, and his wife Ngozi, what a woman of virtue she is." Ngozi had been his wife for nearly 10 years. She was not just a wife. She was a backbone. From the early morning before the cock crowed, she would rise, fetch water from the stream, prepare food, and ensure her husband left the house with honor. She respected him, cared for their 2 children, and kept their home spotless. When villagers saw her, they often said, "That is a true wife, a pillar of her home." But as seasons passed, something began to change in Obinna. At first, it was small. He began to return home late, claiming the farm held him back, or that traders delayed him at the market. Ngozi, ever patient, would set aside his meal, waiting for him, only to see him stagger in long after the moon had risen. At first, she thought little of it. Men work hard. Men get tired. But soon, the signs became impossible to ignore. His laughter no longer filled the house. His eyes no longer lit up when his children ran to him. Even at the evening meals, his mind seemed elsewhere. He would eat silently, barely noticing the taste of the soup she had labored over, and then retreat to his mat, pretending to be weary. The truth began to reveal itself slowly in the marketplace. Whispers started. Traders spoke in low voices. "Have you seen Obinna with that girl Adaeze?" Always together, laughing like they share secrets. Some said they saw him buying her jewelry. Others claimed they saw them walking by the river, their hands brushing as though they belonged to each other. Adaeze was younger, vibrant, with skin smooth like palm oil and laughter that turned heads. She wore bright clothes, beads that jingled, and her smile had a dangerous sweetness. Unlike Ngozi, who carried herself with dignity and humility, Adaeze was bold, flamboyant, and unashamed. She knew how to flatter, how to bend her words like honey, how to make a man feel like a king, even if he was walking through the mud. Obinna, who once had wisdom, fell deep into her trap. He began to spend his earnings on her. The coins that should have gone into feeding his children, the savings that could have been used to repair the leaking roof, were now wasted on gifts for Adaeze wrappers, perfumes, and even food she did not cook herself. At night, when Ngozi asked, "My husband, where is all our money gone?" "The children need shoes, and the market prices are rising," he would snap angrily. "Woman, must you question me every time? Do you not know I work hard for this family? If the money is not enough, find a way to manage. Stop your nagging." Ngozi would bow her head, her heart heavy, but she held her tongue. She knew that in marriage, patience was a garment every woman must wear. But patience, though deep, has its limits. The neighbors began to notice. One evening, as women pounded yam together, one of them leaned close to Ngozi and whispered, "Sister, you must be strong. We see your husband with Adaeze often. He does not even hide it anymore. The whole village is talking." Ngozi's hands trembled on the pestle, but she forced a smile. "May the gods help us," she whispered. Days turned into weeks, and Obinna's betrayal grew bolder. He stopped eating at home, preferring Adaeze's company. He refused to sleep in his own house, leaving Ngozi alone with their children while he wasted nights in Adaeze's hut. The once loving husband had turned into a stranger. The climax of his disgrace came during a community gathering. It was a festival day. Drums beat loudly, children danced, and the elders sat in honor. Families came together to showcase unity, and every man was expected to stand proudly beside his wife. Ngozi dressed in her best wrapper, tying her headgear neatly, determined to show strength despite her broken heart. She held her children close and searched the crowd for Obinna. And then she saw him. He was not at her side. Instead, he walked proudly into the gathering with Adaeze, his hand resting on her shoulder as though she was his queen. Gasps filled the air. Whispers spread like wildfire. Women shook their heads. Men muttered under their breath. Even the children pointed and whispered, "Is that not Obinna? Where is his wife? Why is he walking with Adaeze?" Ngozi's heart broke into pieces. Her hands tightened on her children's shoulders as tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood tall, her dignity intact, even as her husband humiliated her before the entire village. One Elder Okik, leaned on his staff and shook his head. A man who abandons the river that has quenched his thirst for years to chase after a mirage in the desert will soon realize the mirage cannot quench his thirst. The villagers nodded, murmuring agreement. But Obinna? He laughed proudly, ignoring their judgment. His eyes shone with arrogance as he declared loudly, "Adaeze is the one who understands me. She gives me peace, not nagging. From today, she is my true companion." The entire village erupted in murmurs. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others spat on the ground in disgust. Ngozi turned silently and walked away, her children following her. She did not argue, she did not shout, she did not beg. For in her silence, there was power. And in her dignity, there was strength. But the villagers knew what Obinna did not. No man mocks his wife and abandons his home without the gods taking note. And soon, Obinna's laughter would turn to tears, his pride to shame. For when the side chick's beauty fades, when her honeyed words turn to venom, when fortune crumbles like dry yam, then Obinna would understand the weight of the choice he made. And the village, already waiting, knew that the downfall of Obinna had only just begun. The sun had barely risen the next morning when the news of Obinna's shameful act spread like wildfire across the entire village. What he did at the festival was no small thing. In a community where respect, family, and unity were prized above all, to abandon your wife publicly and parade another woman as though she were a trophy was not only an insult to Ngozi, it was an insult to every elder, every marriage, and every tradition that held the village together. At the market square, the women gathered with baskets of peppers, yams, and tomatoes, but their minds were not on trade. Their voices buzzed like bees, carrying the same topic. "Did you see Obinna yesterday?" One woman asked, shaking her head. The man walked in with Adaeze as though Ngozi had never existed. Another woman clicked her tongue. A man who forgets the wife who cooked his food, bore his children, and washed his clothes for 10 years. What kind of man is that? "Not a man," another replied bitterly. "Just a boy playing with fire." Even the young girls, who usually spent their time giggling about suitors and new rappers, were whispering among themselves. If a husband like Obinna can leave Ngozi for Adaeze, then who can we trust? Ngozi is beautiful, respectful, and hardworking. What else could a man want? The gossip did not end there. At the palm wine tapper's hut, where men gathered after farm work, the story was the only subject. One man slapped his thigh and said, "Obinna has lost his senses. How can he abandon a woman like Ngozi? She has never disrespected him. That a day she will finish him." Another, older and wiser, took a sip of his calabash and said slowly, "It is greed that blinds a man. The one who abandons his roof because he sees a shiny leaf will soon discover that the leaf cannot shelter him from the rain." The men nodded, agreeing. Everyone knew it was true, but Obinna did not care. He was drunk on the sweetness of Adaeze's flattery. Whenever she laughed at his jokes, even the foolish ones, he felt like a king. When she held his hand in public, he mistook it for love, not realizing it was a performance she mastered well. And when she whispered promises of joy, he believed every word, blinded to the hunger slowly creeping into his own home. Ngozi, meanwhile, carried her pain in silence. She continued to wake early, fetch water, and cook for her children. She did not speak ill of her husband to anyone, though the whole village waited, expecting her to lash out. Instead, she chose dignity. One day, as she sat by the fire preparing soup, Elder O'Keek visited her. The old man leaned heavily on his staff, his gray beard flowing, his eyes filled with wisdom. "My daughter," he said softly, "do not let the words of men or the betrayal of your husband break you. You have done no wrong. It is Obinna who has forgotten the laws of marriage and the wisdom of the ancestors. The gods do not close their eyes forever. They see. They will answer." Ngozi bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Father. I only pray my children will not grow to hate their father for what he has done." The elder placed a hand on her shoulder. "Children remember actions more than words. If he continues down this path, they will see him for what he has become. But you, Ngozi, must remain their example of strength. In silence lies power." And so, Ngozi endured, but the community was not silent. At the village square, during evening gatherings, Obinna's name was now spoken with disdain. Where once men praised him for his strength and wealth, now they shook their heads in pity. Women warned their daughters to avoid men like him. Even children, innocent as they were, whispered, "That is the man who left his wife for Adaeze." One evening, a group of elders decided to confront Obinna. They summoned him under the great Iroko tree where disputes were settled and wisdom was shared. When he arrived, dressed proudly in his new clothes, Adaeze following closely behind, the elders did not smile. Elder O'Keek spoke first. "Obinna," he said, his voice steady but firm, "we have heard and seen your actions. You have brought shame to your home and insult to your wife. Do you not know that when a man dishonors his wife, he dishonors himself?" Obinna scoffed, crossing his arms. "Elders, with respect, you do not live in my house. You do not know the troubles Ngozi gave me. Adaeze understands me better. She gives me peace." "Peace?" Another elder asked sharply. "Is peace found in abandoning your children's mother? Is peace found in humiliating your wife before the village?" But Obinna, puffed up with pride, replied, "Ngozi was always complaining, always demanding. Adaeze is different. I have made my choice, and I stand by it." The elders exchanged weary looks. One of them shook his head and muttered, "A stubborn goat only learns when the whip touches its back." Elder O'Keek warned, "Obinna, the gods do not sleep. When a man builds his house on sand, it will collapse when the rains come. You think you are standing tall, but you will soon fall. Go and reflect before it is too late." But Obinna laughed loudly, turning to Adaeze. "Do you hear them? They do not understand us. Let us go." And he walked away, ignoring their wisdom. The elders sighed. They knew that no advice could save a man determined to destroy himself. Meanwhile, Adaeze basked in her new power. She paraded through the market, flaunting the gifts Obinna gave her: new wrappers, beads, and bangles. She mocked Ngozi silently with every step, enjoying the whispers of envy and scorn that followed her. But what she did not know was this: envy is short-lived, and beauty without virtue is a fire that burns out quickly. As for Ngozi, though she remained silent, her strength began to win hearts. Villagers admired her for not lowering herself to insults or public quarrels. They said, "Ngozi carries her shame with dignity. She is a woman of true character." Mothers began pointing her out to their daughters, saying, "Learn from her. Even in pain, she walks with grace." And so the lines were drawn. The village stood behind Ngozi, even as Obinna basked in false glory. The dark clouds were already gathering on Obinna's path, for no man builds his happiness on the tears of another without paying the price. And Obinna's price was coming swiftly, heavily, and painfully. The elders carried Chike slowly toward the compound where truth and healing were sometimes begun. His breaths came short and jagged. His chest trembled as if the weight of his shame had turned into physical pain. He could not walk alone, for the village had become heavy upon him, heavy with judgment, heavy with disappointment, heavy with the knowledge that a man who abandons his home must one day face the harvest of his choice. Ngozi sat beneath the shade of the great Iroko, her hands folded, her gaze on the red earth. Children clustered near her, shy and curious, still too young to fully understand the storms of grown men, but old enough to sense the sorrow that had come to their household. She had not rejoiced in his fall. The deep place inside a true woman's heart does not take pleasure in another's pain. Yet her sorrow was laced with a new clarity, the clarity of one who had lived through betrayal and remained upright. As they placed Chike upon a mat beneath a sacred tree, Paokaro stepped forward once more. His voice was softer now, tempered by years and sorrow. "A man who returns must do more than speak words," he said. "He must show by sweat, by patience, and by service that he has been remade. The village will decide his path, not in wrath, but in justice." Chike, weak and broken, lifted his head. His eyes, once bright with arrogance, were now hollow with regret. He spoke, voice like the whisper of dried leaves. "Elders, I was blind. I saw brightness and mistook it for light. I left my home for a shadow. If there is a road to repair, I will walk it. Tell me what I must do." Paokoro's gaze traveled to Ngozi. The woman before them was quiet, but in her silence there was a strength that did not bend. The elder asked, "Ngozi, tell us what you ask of him. The village will uphold your wish." Ngozi rose slowly, her voice steady though the memory of humiliation trembled beneath it. "I do not ask for vengeance. What I ask is simple, and it is for the good of all. Let him return not as a master, but as a learner. Let him serve the family he abandoned, feed the children he left to hunger in small ways that teach him humility. Let him mend what he broke, the roof, the fence, the wounds in our home. Let him prove he can hold steadiness in the face of temptation." Her words were not bitter. They were measured like the scales of justice. A murmur of approval rolled through the crowd. The elders nodded. The path set was neither vengeance nor pardon without price. It was restoration forged in hard work. And so it began. For the first days, Chike's life was a string of small labors that felt to him like great tests. He rose before the sun and swept the compound, gathering leaves until his arms ached. He fetched water from the farthest well, his legs burning from the march back and forth. He mended fences with hands that had been soft from neglect. He cooked porridge in the early dawn, tasting the salt as he remembered the meals he once spurned. He took the children to the stream and sat while they chattered, and in their chatter, he heard truths about himself that he had long refused to see. Adaeze was gone. She had fled when the village turned its face. Her promises had been promises of noise and color, but noise fades and color washes out in the rain. The man who had followed her found only empty laughter, no shelter from storms. As Chike worked, he learned the hard arithmetic of consequence. Money spent on charm did not sow seed in the field. Nights spent in another woman's hut did not mend a leaking roof. Pride borrowed joy like credit. Interest always king do. Days passed into weeks, and Chike's body grew stronger, but his heart was still learning its hardest lessons. Ngozi watched, not to gloat, but to see whether the man who had broken them could now hold the fragments together. She saw him wipe his brow, saw him fumble with the baby's cradle, saw apologies formed by calloused lips. He was not yet redeemed. Redemption would be measured over months, perhaps years. Yet the first signs of change were there. Small, stubborn things like a softened voice, a hand that reached to help without being asked, an evening spent listening rather than leaving. The village watched, for such transformations are rare and precious. They are the stuff of proverbs. They watched as elders reminded him daily, a broken calabash can be mended, but remember, that the scene tells of what once was broken. Children would run up and hug him, uncertain but curious, and sometimes his tears fell quietly, unseen by many, washing the dust from his face. But life, as always, is not only labor and lesson. The gods test the heart in ways subtle and cruel. One season, the rains were poor. The yams that had once promised abundance curled small beneath the soil. The market that had once been generous gave small returns. Money grew thin in the house. Yet Chaik did not run. He planted again, worked harder, and sometimes slept at the farm, protecting his crops from night thieves. Through hardship, his pledge to mend held. Meanwhile, rumors continued to rustle in the marketplace. Some men muttered that Ngozi would never take him back, that she was noble but proud and unyielding like a rock. Some women said she deserved a new husband of better sense. Others whispered that the children should be given to relatives for care, that the father had forfeited his place. One evening, as the moon rose full and silver, a fever swept the village. It took children, then elders, then workers. The chief's own niece fell ill and coughed shallowly on a mat made of straw. Panic fluttered at the edges of the community. The healer invoked old rites. Herbs were ground, and steam rose like smoke from the earth. Hands moved fast, and hands moved slow. In a time of sickness, no house is an island. Chaik, despite his broken past, did not flee. He rose at dawn and walked through the rain to gather bitter leaves and roots the healer requested. He sat through long nights and kept the fire alight. He carried water to the fevered and held trembling hands. In the glare of crisis, the village saw what endurance and unglamorous sacrifice looked like. It was there, in those nights of vigil, that something shifted more than any forced labor could achieve. Ngozi, who had watched and weighed, saw not the man who had left her, but the one who now returned to the only road that matters, the road of service. She observed the sweat on his back as he tilled, the calluses on his hands, the way his voice softened when the children cried. Small things. That the great wheel of forgiveness often turns on small things. One night, during a lull in the fever's grip, Chaik sat by the doorway and spoke from the emptiness inside him. Ngozi, he whispered, voice raw as new leather, I have begged in public. I have cooked in the dust. I have failed you in the ways men most must not fail. If your heart will not take me back, I will live the life of a wandering man. But I must tell you this. I am learning. I will not be the man I was. Ngozi listened. Her jaw clenched. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. She had been scorned, shamed, and abandoned, but she was also the mother of their children. In her silence, there was a ledger of loss and care. When she finally spoke, her words were neither mercy nor vengeance. They were boundary and truth. Chaik, she said, you have begun a path that others have walked before. Some are changed fully. Others only wear the habit of change, but carry the old heart. You will not be welcomed back with open arms, because bridges rebuilt must be tested by crossing. You will stay in this house as you have asked to. But know this, trust rebuilds slower than roofs. Prove your steadiness not by words, but by years of small, honest deeds. Chaik bowed his head. It was not the triumph of a lover returned, but the small tender birth of accountability. The elders accepted her terms. They declared that he must live among them faithfully, work the fields with his hands, and never again bring shame upon the house. Seasons turned. The famine season ended. The rains came kinder. The yams swelled. The goats birthed once more. The market returned its favor slowly. Chaik's hands, once soft, were now rough with honest labor. The children laughed and chased one another, their pockets filled with pebbles and dreams, but a history remained. People forgave in the shape of new contracts, not erasing what happened, but letting new proofs stand beside old wrongs. Chike did not stand in the center of the village as before. He walked humbly now, nodding to elders, sharing the load of work, attending to the village tasks without show. Folks began to speak differently of him. He is learning, they would say. He has broken, and he mends. Yet every story must end with a blade of truth. Actions have weight, and some debts cannot be erased. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Chike sat beneath the iroko and wept like a man stripped bare. Not because the village mocked him, they had fallen silent on that score, but because he finally understood the shape of his own ruin. In the quiet of the dusk, he pressed his palms to his face and cried until his tears were salt on his lips and his chest felt hollow. Those who heard said he cried as if he had shed blood, not in the literal sense, but in the deep old way of men who had loved foolishly and paid in loss. The elders muttered a proverb that would travel. He who trades bread for sugar will starve when the grains are gone. So ends the story not in the thunder of dramatic vengeance, but in the slow, aching work of becoming modest again. Obinna lived the remainder of his days rebuilding what he had broken. He did not become a hero. He became a man who knew his limits. He ate humble food, sat with humble people, and learned that what he once mocked, loyalty, patience, steadiness, was the only true currency of life.